How you doing, Mandy?
Good. How are you?
Doing good, doing good.
Back in my little 50s. You never know when I'm going to show up to class looking like, you know?
My dentist told me earlier I look like Mr. Rogers. So that's
What?
because I have the cardigan thing going on.
Oh, okay, okay, okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. Let's see. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So we have plenty to discuss today when it comes to books 3 through 5 of Confessions. Um, I thought we had a really good discussion the other day, so I appreciate you guys showing up and turning out, turning it up a little. So you guys did a good job the other day. So let's keep that good momentum going. Um, we have I have several cons again when it comes to discussing this book to kind of fully unlock the potential of the book. You have to kind of identify a few different key concepts in the book. Okay, so this just like we did the other day with original sin. Original sin was the big concept the other day. Um, just real quick, I'm going to call on somebody. Emily, I'm going to call on you. You remember what original sin was all about from the other day?
I wasn't in class on Monday because I had a meeting, so no, I missed it.
Okay, so definitely go back and catch that recording.
I will.
What about? I'll call on you, Autumn. You remember?
Like where you're born with sin from Adam and Eve.
Yep. Yeah, we are all born with the sin that we inherit from Adam and Eve. And this is the idea, right? So human nature at its core is kind of corrupted, right? Even from the earliest of ages by this notion of original sin. And Augustine talked about the jealous babies, right? We talked about the jealous babies passage. But there's also the other big concept from the other day was concupiscence. concupiscence. Allison, I'll call on you. You remember concupiscence?
I'm gonna be honest. It's like on the tip of my tongue.
Okay, see if you can work it out. I know you know it.
You explained it. It was like perverseness, like from
Mhm.
Edgar Allan Poe. Like you're drawn to do bad things because it's bad and you can.
Exactly. Yeah, it's part of our. You got it. It's part of our human nature to always choose wrong, right? To do what is against our best interest. Our best interest, Augustine says, is to follow God's order and God's law, and to try to love God. And by doing so, you will live the good life, right? This is kind of where it all boils down into ethics, right? You will live the good life if you prioritize God as the highest of your priorities. However, as his whole story attests, it's human nature to always go wrong, right? We choose what's in front of us rather than what the ultimate end is. So that's kind of, and he's definitely sort of going into that in book 3 through 5, because today we hear all about all of his problems, right? We hear about his unquenchable lust, right? His unquenchable lust. He talks about how he has a mistress and he has a kid with his mistress. We hear about that, but we also sort of hear about his lust, if you can call it, is a sense sort of lust, but a lust for knowledge as well. That's kind of a pretty key theme of today's readings. He's tempted by this other religion that was kind of springing up. The religion really didn't last long, right? Like you think about the major world religions, we've talked about almost all of them: Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Islam's the only one we haven't talked about yet. But he talks about the religion called Manichaeism, and we'll talk a little bit today as well. What did they believe, and why did Augustine feel so tempted by it? But the first, I'm going to enlist the help of the Thomistic Institute in explaining the first concept, okay? Because this video does a better job explaining it than I can. This is a very foundational concept, guys, for the rest of the class as far as this goes, okay? And this concept is called natural law. Natural law. Whenever we think about how have Christians influenced the field of ethics, especially, it comes down to this notion of the natural law, right? To kind of ground you before I show you the video. Whenever you think about ethics, you think about even something like morality, right and wrong. The question is, no matter what culture you live in, no matter where you live, do we as human beings innately know what is right and wrong? The Christians would argue, yes. This is called the natural law, right? It doesn't matter what a country's mores or laws might say. Certain things are always wrong. Think about something like the 10 Commandments, right? Murder, adultery, stealing. These things, no matter what time or place or social condition, they're always wrong. There's always there. We know what is right. We know what is wrong. And we're going to kind of go into more than this in the next couple of weeks. We're going to kind of build to it. But what we're going to build to is this notion called moral relativism. Moral relativism. What that concept means, there is no sense of universal right, universal wrong. Different cultures have different mores, who's to say that, I mean, even if you think about the United States, different states have different mores as far as that goes, right? If you go out west to California or Oregon or Washington State, when it comes to certain social issues, they're a lot more open about certain things than West Virginia or South Carolina or Mississippi, right? So, who is to say what is right or what is wrong, right? We might think, kind of come together as a consensus here in West Virginia and say no to a certain issue. But in California, if they think it's okay, well, if it works for them, it works for me, right? That's kind of what moral relativism is. This is going to be a tension that kind of will inform the entire rest of our class. Is there an absolute sense of right and wrong? Or is morality and the good life contingent on the values that different cultures place on it? To kind of give you an example, think about this is oftentimes used as an example to talk about moral relativism. In Africa, certain countries in Africa, they will mutilate women. Okay, like they're so obsessed. They're sort of so obsessed with sexual purity and stuff in certain places over there. What they will do is they will mutilate a woman's cervix, okay, so that she can't feel any sexual pleasure from the act of sex. Well, I think that most of us would probably say, hell no, right? That is absolutely wrong. That is a human rights violation. But if you kind of subscribe to a moral relativist point of view, who are we to judge them? They all kind of get together and they agree on that was okay. Who's to say that they're wrong and we're right? I used a really awful example here just to kind of illustrate, right, this tension between natural law and moral relativism. Augustine talks about the natural law today in our passages. But first, let me show you the video. I need to pull this up. You guys tell me, unmute or something if it doesn't play the sound. I think it's going to, but tell me if it doesn't.
With childhood cancer, comes at you in waves. Every day.
St. Thomas Aquinas' teaching on natural law and its relation to human law has had an enormous influence, but it isn't always easy for us to understand it unless we grasp the deep roots it has in his wider thought centered on God. In a previous video, we saw that the eternal law is the highest kind of law. Aquinas says that it is the eternal plan of order in the mind of God for the whole universe, and further, that this plan is in a certain way in the creatures that God creates, so that they have an inclination or tendency to their own proper acts and ends according to where they fit in this vast and beautiful divine plan. This eternal law, this plan of God, is imprinted in rational creatures, like human beings, in a special way. And Aquinas calls this the natural law. He says that the natural law is the rational creature's participation in the eternal law. What does that mean? We are capable of understanding the world around us, grasping with our minds what is good for us to do, and moving ourselves to do it according to this rational desire, which we call our will. That means that we have a higher participation in God's providential plan than other creatures do, because we can understand it and become willing agents in bringing it to completion for ourselves, for others, and for our communities. Let's unpack this. Like other lower creatures, we have certain inclinations or tendencies that are natural to us. They're a part of our natures, features of the kind of creatures we are. The natures of inanimate things, of plants, of animals, entirely determine their movements. A stone goes down. A tree flowers in the spring. A cow eats grass. These actions are natural to these kinds of things. Human beings are like these things in a certain way. We're creatures with material bodies, and so, like other animals, we have an inclination to remain in being, to seek food and self-preservation, to reproduce and to raise offspring. Yet, unlike these creatures, we are endowed with the power of reason, which means that we're not simply moved by brute force or instinct. We have something higher, a spiritual soul, which gives our nature a spiritual dimension. Now, on this point, there's often a very deep misunderstanding. Our spiritual nature is the basis for our ability to understand and to make free choices. It gives us a higher perspective on our lower or bodily inclinations and desires, so that, for example, we can decide at a particular moment that we will not eat right now, even though we're hungry. But here's the key point. Our spiritual nature is not opposed to our natural inclinations. In fact, it also has its own natural inclinations. And these inclinations, which belong to us because of the spiritual dimension of the human person, don't determine our movements and actions, but rather they're the source and the cause of them. Our spiritual nature lies at the root of our freedom and gives it its vital energy. Consider what we mean when we say, "I'm thirsting for the truth." We're using an analogy. We all know what it's like to be thirsty. A biological inclination like this sometimes directs our appetite in a very compelling way. But is thirst contrary to our freedom? No. It's in eating and drinking that we have the physical strength to do all the other things that we do. Is our thirst for the truth an obstacle or limit to our freedom? Well, obviously not. What we're trying to express is actually the root of our free desire to know the truth. And anyone who's ever been drawn to a particular subject and who thirsts to know more about it realizes that this thirst, this love for the subject, doesn't decrease freedom, but actually is the root of our free activity by which we learn more and more about what we love. In other words, our spiritual inclinations are real. They're really a part of our spiritual nature, and they're not blind determinations that limit our freedom. Rather, they're its very source, and they spur it on. Let's now return to the idea of the eternal law. Aquinas teaches that God has imprinted in creatures their inclinations to their proper acts and ends in accordance with God's eternal plan, and likewise that he's imprinted these inclinations in human beings in a higher way. We have inclinations that belong to us in virtue of our spiritual nature. We're now in a better position to understand what Aquinas means by his famous claim that the precepts of the natural law follow the order of our natural inclinations. He means that as we understand the inclinations of our spiritual nature, we come to grasp what God made a human being to be and what human life is ordered to. And so we come to know what a human being ought to do and avoid. St. Thomas lists 5 principal natural inclinations: the inclination to the good, that is, to what perfects us; the inclination to self-preservation, for example, to seek food, shelter, clothing, to avoid threats to our life; the inclination to sexual union and the upbringing of offspring; the inclination to knowing the truth; and the inclination to living in society, which includes the inclination to friendship and to justice and fairness towards others. Of course, some people might sometimes act contrary to one or another of these inclinations, and there's always the possibility that due to sin, our desires will become distorted. But Aquinas thinks that these 5 inclinations really are features of the kind of beings that we are, and that they give us a fundamental orientation towards what will make us increasingly happy and increasingly free. It's important to see that for St. Thomas, natural law is thus not imposed on us by some alien will that commands us from above. It's rather the very design of our being. As we come to know this with our minds, we're then able to participate intentionally and freely in this plan. We order ourselves, our actions, beings lower than us, and even our communities according to this plan by the use of our freedom. This is, in an important sense, the very purpose of our freedom, that we would be the creatures that order ourselves freely and knowingly to God according to his plan. Let's conclude with some brief remarks on the relation between natural law and human law. Aquinas thinks that a human law is only just when it's in accord with the natural law, and that laws that conflict with the natural law are not morally binding. The natural law is most clear with respect to certain general and negative precepts, like, for example, the precepts of the Ten Commandments. Theft, murder, lying, adultery, and other sexual sins, suicide, these are wrong always and everywhere because they're contrary to what the natural law teaches us is the good for human beings: self-preservation, sexual union and the raising of children, truth, life together in society. Positive precepts are a different case because they're harder to apply. We might all agree with the precepts, be brave, be just, but there are many ways we can do these things, and some of them might be better than others. That's why Aquinas thinks the negative precepts of the natural law are more easily known and apply always and everywhere, while the positive precepts don't necessarily apply in every circumstance. Aquinas thinks that an important part of the job of human lawmakers is to specify and apply the general precepts of the natural law in a particular context and for a particular community. Then, always respecting what the natural law demands in its negative precepts, human lawmakers should write laws that order their community towards its common good. For readings, podcast.
That was a lot to take in. But as he said, Aquinas was a medieval Christian theologian who came several centuries after Augustine. But Augustine's kind of building the foundation here in Confessions as far as what Aquinas would develop there, talking about the natural law, right? It is part of our human nature to eat, right? Drink. It's part of our human nature to want to reproduce. It is also part of our human nature to seek friendship. All these things Aristotle talked about, right? It is also part of our human nature to seek the truth. And this is kind of what Augustine's after in these sections of the Confessions. He's seeking the truth. He's looking in all the wrong places. Okay, that's kind of what he's after. To give you an example of the natural law and how the natural law works, the priest there also mentioned the natural law in opposition to the human law. But you guys know these lines. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form. You know what that is? What is that? You know that document.
It's one of Lincoln's speeches, but I can't think of which one it is off the top of my head.
Go back about 100 years, Emily.
Further than that?
Yep.
Oh, shoot.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal.
Okay. That's... I know it, but I can't think of what it is off the top of my head.
Yep, the Declaration of Independence.
Yep. I was like, man, I should have known that because talked about it in Botz's class. Rick. Yeah, no, it is.
Yep, the Declaration of Independence. That passage I just said Thomas Jefferson summed up perfectly in that passage what the natural law is, right? A self-evident fact in the natural law is that all men are created equal. A self-evident fact in the natural law is men have certain unalienable rights, such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Another part of the natural law is that if a government does not follow the natural law, we have a responsibility to follow the natural law instead of the law of the government. So anytime, this is a really important thing to mention, especially in our current political context in this country, okay? Over the past several weeks, especially when there was all of these protests up in Minnesota and all this stuff over immigration, no matter how you feel about that issue, there was a rhetoric going around that no matter what, you always follow the law of the land, right? So if a police officer or an ICE officer in this case tells you no, like back off or whatever, you have to listen. No, under this idea of the natural law, that's not right. If the law of the land is unjust, if it does not follow the rights that God has put on us from our own human nature, we have a duty to God to defy those laws, right? So anybody who tells you the Bible says that you always have to follow the law of the land, no matter what, that's not right. It's been part of Christian theology for millenniums now that there's a higher law, and we always have a responsibility to follow the higher law over the law of the land. So I just wanted to mention that because this has been part of our public discourse lately, and I thought it would be worth mentioning. Okay. So, in many ways, this is an interesting concept, but it's very much a common sense concept, right? It's both profound and extremely simple, this concept. We know within our being what is right, what is wrong. We have to listen to that voice within us first and foremost. We want to ground ourselves in the text here. I wrote it down. Hold on. It was in book 3. Let me find the passage I haven't marked. Page 44. Page 44 is where I'm looking. This is where Augustine talks about the idea. Starting at the top of page 44, Augustine says, I also did not know that true inward justice, which judges not by custom, but by the most righteous law of Almighty God. By this law, the moral customs of different regions and periods were adapted to their places and times, while that law itself remains unaltered everywhere and always. It is not one thing at one place or time, another thing at another. Accordingly, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Moses and David and all those praised by the mouth of God were righteous. An untrained mind judges them wicked. They judge by man's day and assess the customs of the entire race by the criterion of their own moral code. It is as if a man, ignorant of what piece of armor is designed for which part of the body, should want to cover the head with a greave or put on his leg a helmet, and then complain that it is not a good fit. He goes on and on. This is where he introduces this is going to be a common theme throughout the rest of the text. He introduces this idea that there's a natural law innate to our being. Again, this is an important concept. It's going to undergird the Christian approach to ethics and all of these different issues we're going to look at through the rest of the semester. When we start looking at issues like abortion, for instance, this kind of idea of the natural law undergirds the Catholic and Christian response to that. Euthanasia. Should people be able to commit physician-assisted suicide? Well, if suicide is against their nature to be, then it goes against the natural law, right? Let me ask you guys this. This is a tough question. What do you think about this idea? Do you agree with it? That there's a law, a higher law that we know is right and wrong? Or is right and wrong decided by cultures? Right? That's a hard one. Is there a God's eternal law, or is this just a fancy concept that's purposefully designed to be hard to argue with? Right? That's probably a good way to put it. A concept that's it's designed so well that it's hard to argue with, right? Which is probably what you could say, that this is a fallacy if you want to kind of get deep into it. A tough one. Is there an internal law, or is morality just what we make it? I should probably let you free write on that one, but I'll call on some people instead. Okay. Jordan, you always got some insightful stuff. What do you got to say on that one?
Oh boy. This is a tricky one. It's a very well constructed argument. And it is very difficult to really push against it. I think I would have to think on it like a lot to be able to really work my way through it, especially since I'm sure that it's probably been taught differently by different theologians. And it leaves me with like a lot of questions. Because it has, this idea that like we're oriented to the natural law, and that we have this innate sense of what's right and what's wrong. And this comes from our natural human inclinations, which begs questions like, do all humans have the exact same natural inclinations? And what do we do with that? I think moral relativism is kind of I think it's a bit dangerous. I think it could lead us to accepting things that we shouldn't. The female genital mutilation is a good example of the kinds of things that we could accept that maybe we shouldn't if we take that idea too far. I also think that there's reason to be a little bit skeptical over, putting the same universal ideas on every person regardless, because I think we, there's different things like, how different people's brains work, and how different, how, we have like different talents and different, how do I put this? Like we have different inner psychology, behind us. So I don't know. I think I would have to sit on this one and think it through some more.
Well, luckily, we're going to be talking about this the whole rest of the semester. So on the last day, I'm going to see what you think. Is that a deal?
Sounds like a plan.
Okay. Allison, what do you think of this one, the natural law?
Well, I thought I had my answer. My answer was going to be yes, I think to a point there is a natural law, but Jordan really made me think about it. Now
Yeah.
I think I need to think about it harder.
Yeah.
Because my original thought was, yes, I think there is a natural law to a point. Like, I feel like pretty much every person's going to know not to kill somebody. And then, but then Jordan said that, yes, we are all wired different. And I don't know if you can put the same standards on everybody. So that's something I would have to think about too.
Yeah. Take, for instance, what Jordan said, the human desire to reproduce, right? That's something that he said we all have. Well, there's a lot of couples who are heterosexual, right, who decide not to reproduce for various reasons. What about if that's your natural inclination to reproduce? What about if you're gay, right? Like that, for instance, just throwing a wrench in this idea of it's our human desire to reproduce. That's what the Catholic Church teaches, right? But some people don't do that. Lying and stealing and adultery and all that stuff, that seems all pretty common sense, right? Some of the stuff, when you start thinking about it really hard, maybe not. Does it make you a bad person if you don't want to reproduce? I don't think so, right? That's your choice. So that's kind of where we're going with this line of thought. I saw you pop up in the corner of my screen there, Hannah. You want to comment on this one?
I don't know. Like Allison said, I think I need to think about it more. People are wired differently, and not, everybody's brain chemistry is different. And what if we're expected not to know, to just like go out and kill someone? But what if this person has mental issues and they don't know right from wrong? Like, I don't know. That's a tough one.
Yeah, that's a. I'm gonna raise another question. I'm going there today. Okay, I'm feeling it today. Okay, but if there's a natural law, there's an idea called the just war doctrine. Right, we're arguing this right now in our country because of what we're doing with Iran. Is the Pope just made the argument last weekend that God, he says, does not listen to the prayers of warmongers, right? People who start wars unjustly. If there's a such thing as a natural law, though, there is a just war, right? Like, is it always wrong to kill? Is there times that it's okay to have a just war? What would that criteria be for having a just war? If you think of probably, if I was going to frame this idea, the best example that I would use would be World War II, right? World War II is probably the model of the just war doctrine, right? Hitler and everything he stood for, fascism, Can you think of anything that goes against the natural law more than that? Right?
I think there's two things. Even if people are non-Christian, there are two biblical principles. One, the Bible talks about multiplying and, um, being blessed and multiplying and offspring and all of those things. So I think that, is it human nature to have children? Yes. But I don't see anywhere biblically or even morally that it would be wrong to not have children. It's just talking about the blessings that you have in that. And then as far as murder, the Bible also talks about abiding by the law of the land. And so if the law of the land is at war and you have to defend your land against another country, another threat, whatever, and protect who we are, I mean, for me personally, if I was in the military and that was something that I had to come against, that would be something that I could do. But on the flip side, somebody took my parking spot in Walmart. Completely different. So I think you really just have to weigh more than just the question.
Yeah, to build on what you said there, Mandy, let's say that you were drafted to be a soldier in World War II, right? Again, using my idea of the just war. What about if you were drafted during the Vietnam War, right? Like there was a lot of people who were conscientious objectors who did not want to fight in the Vietnam War because they didn't think Vietnam was just. This current war that we're in, don't get me started on that, okay? Is there a difference in following the law of the land in such a situation like that? I don't know if you want to. I see you're in Walmart, Mandy. I don't know if you want to get deep here while you're in the middle of Walmart. I don't know if you want to answer that. Is there a distinction there?
What was your question about the Walmart? I heard you say Walmart again.
I thought you were in Walmart. You're at your work.
Yeah, I am.
My question was, is there a difference in following the law of the land? Like, let's say you get drafted, but you get drafted to go to World War II versus you get drafted to go to Vietnam, right? Like Vietnam, it's kind of hard to argue we had a good reason for that war.
Me personally, I'm a very strong personality. And me personally, if you are, say, my major and you tell me we're going somewhere and I have to hurt a child or a mother or a grandmother, I don't care where they're from, it's not going to happen. You can kill me, it's not going to happen. If I, morally, spiritually believe in the cause and that's something that, needs to happen, then that would be different. But I don't really care what the aftermath would be for me. There wouldn't be in any setting that you could put me in that says, you have to hurt this innocent person, that I would go along with.
Right. So you're saying you support the natural law then, right? There's a law that goes above the law of the land.
There would be for me. There would be for me. It's the same thing even in marriage. I mean, you can go into the ethics of the family dynamics and stuff, but I don't care if you're married or not and your husband likes things a certain way. That's cool unless he wants you to go against your moral and your spiritual beliefs and those kind of things, and then things are completely different.
Yeah. So interesting conversations here. Right? It's a very again, it's such a simple issue, but it's such a profound issue. It's kind of something that we're going to keep dwelling on as we go. The other big concept now that I want to introduce today we're barely scratching the surface. I don't know if I'm going to get out of book 3 of Confessions today. Okay, I told you to read all. I might just yeah. Here's what I'm going to do, since I haven't even scratched the surface of my lesson plan. Okay, read the rest of it by next Wednesday. Okay, next Monday I'll finish what I wanted to start today, what I was intended to do today. Okay, so I'll give you a whole week to work on the rest of it. Next Monday, no new reading. How's that sound? Okay, good. So the other big concept that I wanted to discuss today is the notion is good and evil, right? We got 30 minutes to discuss the nature of good and the nature of evil, right? And we haven't touched on that yet in this class, and that's a pretty big thing. Where does evil come from? Right? Where does evil come from? One of the things that Augustine gets wrapped up in, again, it's this sort of religion. It didn't make it through the. I'm probably spelling it wrong in the chat, but it didn't make it long in the history of thought, and that religion was called Manichaeism. So, what is the notion of good? What is the notion of evil? The Manichae religion, what it kind of argued was there's two almost like divine beings, right? There's a good divine being, and there's an evil divine being. That's kind of like what the Manichaees thought. And they're pretty much equal. They're pretty much 50-50 in terms of their potency. But the Manichaees kind of taught that throughout history, good and evil would always be in this constant conflict with each other. And eventually, at the end of time, good would triumph. Good would triumph. So that's kind of what Augustine finds himself being seduced by when he talks about the Manichaees in this section of the book. Whenever we think about good and evil from a Christian context, and again, an ethical context, well, we can go into moral relativism if we want. But the question is, where does evil come from, right? How powerful is evil? If you think about it, guys, I mean, the evil that we see in the world can almost be overwhelming sometimes if you want to really dive into it. I know it was like a summer or so ago, this story really haunted me. But I don't know if you guys remember, it was like the summer. It was, I think it might have been last year, or even the year before last. I don't know if you guys remember the story about the guy in Ohio, the dad, and he pretty much killed all of his children in cold blood, right? Did you guys see that story? You remember what I'm talking about? Let me see if I can find you the link.
I don't remember that one. I remember the woman, because she had drowned her children. That was not long ago.
Yeah, you're talking about the woman who had postpartum depression, right? And that's why she killed her children. You see, I'm linking you all to the story if you want to take a look.
Yeah, before I look, are you talking about the one his wife was pregnant too and he killed her? Oh, okay.
You remember this now that you see the link?
Yeah, I do. I also remember that one where those people dressed up as UPS workers.
I don't remember hearing about that one.
Oh no, that one was bad.
Yeah. And this guy pretty much just got all of his 3 children and lined them up and killed them execution style.
Is that the dad that shot his sons in the back of the head?
Yep.
Okay.
And one kid tried to run away, and he
Mhm.
chased the kid down and hunted him like a dog.
Yep. Brought him back and then shot him, and then
And made the mother watch it. He didn't kill the mother; he made her watch it. Yeah, apparently, when they interviewed the guy, when the police showed up, he was seemed like he didn't have a care in the world, right? It's a really sad story, but you see a story like that. My point here is, you see a story like that, and whenever we think, what is the nature of good, what is the nature of evil, you see a story like that, and you think to yourself, well, damn, right? Evil seems pretty potent in this world, right? Is evil just as, ontologically speaking, is evil just as potent as good? Right? That's what the Manichees thought. They were kind of like 50-50, equal forces. They kind of dualistically are always in contention with each other. That is not what Christian metaphysics argues, and Augustine gets into that here in this passage. Let's look at page 43. I saw you turn your camera on there, Mandy. You want to?
Yeah, I agreed that is not what Christians, the Christian belief. But me as a Christian and a mother, there are instances that I'm going to have to just stand before Jesus one day and say, that's what happened. And I would just have to take the consequences as is. But I do believe that if there was ever a plead for insanity, I would be there. To watch you kill my kids, I have a 72-hour rule. If you offend me, I've got 72 hours. I think about it, process it before I come back and be like, hey, Dr. Yeager, can we discuss whatever? And I think that gives me time to like calm down and like make appropriate decisions that I can be proud of and appropriate responses. But in that case, there's no 72 hours. I don't know that it would be 72 seconds before I lost my mind.
Yeah, I mean, even thinking about a story like this guy, it's like I've told you guys, I'm a Roman Catholic. It's against the Roman Catholic Church to support the death penalty, right? The death penalty is saying everybody deserves a chance at repentance. It doesn't matter what they've done, how awful they are. God will take them out when God intends, right? It's not our job to do that. But I admit that I see a story like that, like this guy. I think to myself, well, damn, if anybody deserves it, it's this guy, right? If they were to do it to him, I wouldn't shed a tear. It's probably makes me a bad Catholic to say that, right? But that's just kind of, such evil was so potent that it makes us wonder. It kind of makes us question this stuff. Like Mandy said, somebody did that to her kid, right? Like just retaliation and revenge, right? It's not a good thing, but maybe there would be just, maybe there's a reason to do it in that case. I don't know. It's a tough one. Well, on page 43, look about 2/3 of the way down. He says, in my ignorance, I was disturbed by these. What's he's asking? Where does evil come from? In my ignorance, I was disturbed by these questions, and while traveling away from the truth, I thought I was going towards it. I did not know that evil has no existence except as a privation of good, down to that level which is altogether without being. How could I see this when for me to see meant a physical act of looking with the eyes and of forming an image in the mind? I had not realized God is a spirit, not a figure whose limbs have length and breadth and who has a mass. That's also part of the Manichae faith that God has a finite body. Right? That's not part of the Christian doctrine. But what he said there, evil is a privation of good. A privation of good. Well, what does that mean? Luckily, our buddies over at the Thomistic Institute are going to help us out again. Okay, let me show you.
Why does God permit it in his creation? St. Thomas Aquinas teaches that in a general sense, evil is an absence or lack of what should be there. Technically speaking, we call this a privation. So evil is not a being or a nature, it's the absence of something. Suppose I say, I'm going to draw a circle, and then I don't finish it. You might say, hey, that's a bad circle, part of it's missing. You're pointing out a privation. Notice, though, that I haven't directly caused something that is bad in itself. The circle is good as far as it goes, it just doesn't go all the way. But wouldn't it have been better if I had caused the whole circle to exist? Well, in general, yes. But perhaps there was a good reason why I didn't. Maybe I was trying to illustrate what a privation is. In that case, this defective circle would be an essential part of some larger project, some higher good, like bringing you to understand the problem of evil.
Gaza is at a tipping point. The adults who are malnourished.
This is how Aquinas approaches the problem of evil. God has created a changeable world of material things, and in order for such a world to exist, it's necessary that things grow, die, and decay. Aquinas calls these things natural evils. Gazelles eat grass, and lions eat gazelles. He sets this idea of natural evil in a larger context. It's a necessary feature of the good of the whole ecosystem, of the whole universe. Now, when Aquinas talks about the evil that human beings experience, he no longer speaks of natural evil. Rather, there are two unique types of evil that pertain to rational and free creatures. The evil of pena in Latin, that's translated typically as the evil of pain or penalty or punishment, and the evil of culpa in Latin, translated as the evil of fault or of guilt. So, an example. Suppose Billy the Kid wakes up late for work. He doesn't have a horse, so he steals his neighbor's. This is bad. Of course, for his neighbor, but even more for Billy, who has willfully refused to do what right reason tells him and has committed a serious injustice, an act unworthy of a human person. This is what Aquinas calls the evil of fault or of guilt, and it is a kind of moral suicide. Arrested by the sheriff, Billy is sentenced to prison. This, too, is an evil for him because he's now deprived of his freedom of movement. But this second evil, being in prison, is not the same kind as the first. It's an evil Billy suffers in response to an evil that he committed, and it's called a penalty or punishment. How should we compare these two evils? Well, the evil of fault is worse. By sinning, Billy has freely chosen to make himself a bad man. By contrast, Billy's punishment, while an evil for him in one sense, is good and just, and it can even help Billy become good, especially if he accepts it and offers it in reparation for his fault. God never wills the evil of sin or of fault. Sin is our fault, not God's. We choose some partial good contrary to the order of right reason, not caring about the damage that will result. And God permits us to do this, but he in no way is its cause. But God does will the punishment that follows from this moral evil, both in order to restore the right ordering of justice and also to correct the wrongdoer, much like a judge and other honest citizens rightly desire a thief to be arrested and given a just punishment. Just like Billy can offer up his punishment in reparation for the evil he did, So we too can offer up all the evils we suffer in reparation for the sins we and others have committed. Let's pose a harder question. Why does God permit the suffering of the innocent? We're entering deep waters here, and we can only sketch a very brief answer. Human suffering, bodily death, undergoing persecution and injustice, these are very real and terrible evils, and they were not part of God's original plan for us. He created our first parents in grace with the special privilege of being free from illness, suffering, and death. Those evils only entered the world because of the sin of our first parents, and we inherit the terrible consequences of this original sin: suffering, death, and even an inclination to sin. It's a lot like a baby born to a mother who's a heroin addict. That baby inherits the terrible consequences of the mother's addiction. In those who suffer them, they are the evils of pain or penalty. They can be the occasion for great moral nobility and goodness, like when a person offers his life to God in the midst of illness, or when someone perseveres in the truth and even forgives an unjust persecutor. The hardest question is, why does sin exist? Because every sin involves a privation, a lack of what should be there, we're dealing with non-being, and non-being is, strictly speaking, unintelligible. So we can explain how sin is possible. The creature focuses its attention and directs its will to some limited good, disregarding the defect or disorder that choice will cause. But we cannot explain why the creature does this, because evil is incoherent in itself. It's always stupid and self-defeating. Why then does God permit it? Some have answered this question by using the so-called free will defense, saying that if there's freedom, it's impossible for God to prevent evil. This is not Aquinas' answer, and he thinks it has serious philosophical problems. As we explained in the video on predestination and freedom, God, as our creator, is the origin of our freedom and implants in us our desires for good, and so he can act within our will, moving it to good. So in any particular case, God could move us to freely choose the right thing.
I tried everything: coffee, Pomodoro, and binaural beats, but nothing stuck until I tried.
Why then doesn't he always do so? Here we've reached a mystery too deep for our minds: why God has created this world and not another. Aquinas doesn't think we can say much more than this, but he does offer two quasi-explanations that help us glimpse the deep wisdom of God's providence. First, we can be sure that God only permits evil for the sake of some much better and higher good, including not only our individual good, but the good of the whole creation. This is very mysterious because we can't see this whole, and we can't conceive how permitting sin might lead to good, but we know it's true. God is infinitely powerful and infinitely good, able to bring an even greater good out of every evil. We also know that we are very limited, especially in our understanding of the whole. We're kind of like a baby with a soiled diaper who screams because his father makes him take a bath. He doesn't understand the good that his father is accomplishing for him through what seems to the baby like pointless suffering, but in reality, it's for the baby's good. Finally, Aquinas says that God allows the defect of sin so that he can manifest his goodness in an even greater way as our Savior. This is a beautiful and high truth, and it reaches its pinnacle in the cross. There, God himself takes upon his human shoulders the whole weight of our sins and bears them through terrible suffering, even unto death. He does this precisely so that his redeeming mercy and love for us sinners would shine out more clearly, so that we might be brought from sin unto forgiveness and eternal life.
So some pretty deep stuff in that video. Really simply, the definition: evil is a privation of good. If God is the ultimate being in Christian thought, right? God is pure good. Anything that results from a lack of good, maybe there's certain situations where good just simply isn't present. There's a lack of good. That is where evil emerges. So take for instance, I just got back from Phoenix a couple of weeks ago. Let's say this was kind of what I was doing. Okay, so let's say that I was kind of sitting around by the fancy pool in the hotel. Let's say that I'm sitting around having some margaritas, right? But let's say that there's a child at the pool. Let's use this as an example. There's a child at the pool. I stole this example from a theologian. Okay. Let's say there's a child at the pool. I'm sitting there. I'm enjoying my margarita, right? My enjoyment of that beverage, as long as I don't go too nuts, right? As long as I'm temperate. It's a good. But suddenly the child gets in the pool and starts drowning. Okay. So let's say for the sake of example, there's no lifeguard there. It's just me and the child. The parent's off doing God knows what. Okay. That's not too hard to believe. But if in that moment I'm prioritizing a good, I'm prioritizing the good that I have from drinking that margarita. Suddenly I see that kid drowning. I decide to myself, you know what? I'm going to only think about myself today. I'm going to keep chugging this margarita. The hell with this kid. Okay. Well, I'm prioritizing a good by prioritizing myself. But ideally here, or not ideally, it's hard to argue. There's an even greater good here that can come about by saving the child. Okay. Temporarily putting aside my own comfort, the greater good would be to prioritize the child. But if in that moment I would choose to prioritize myself, that is a privation of good. I'm enjoying something good, but suddenly there's a lack. Good ceases to be, right? We're getting into the realm of non-being. Good ceases to be. Even in an attempt to do good, good suddenly ceases to exist. This is how evil emerges in the thought of Augustine and St. Thomas. Okay. This force of evil it's not because evil's just as powerful as good, to kind of start us off in our discussion. It's not because evil's as powerful as good. If anything, evil's absurd. Right? It's absurd. It's only there when good is absent. That's a pretty deep existential question that a lot of people have used to stop believing in God. Okay, how could God permit something of that, like what that guy did, who I told you, right? How could God permit something like that to happen to a kid? Think about all these atrocities that are happening in the Middle East right now, right? With the war between Israel and Palestine. How could a just God justify that? How could a just God justify the Holocaust? As he said in the video, in many ways, evil has to happen for the world to work. But it also emerges just simply when there's a lack of good. You think of something like the devil in Christian thought, right? Is the devil just as powerful as God? He wants you to think so, but he's not. I don't know if this is all making sense here. This is exactly the in the Christian intellectual tradition. This is how evil is defined, just as a lack of good, a privation. In that moment of me choosing to drink the margarita, over saving the kid, there is suddenly a lack of good. That is how evil emerges. So if you think about it, shame we're running out of time, but if you think about it, that's a more hopeful message. Right? That evil is something that's absurd and silly, and it can be overcome. It's not as powerful as good. So food for thought as we keep reading. Any of you guys have any comments? We have a few minutes left. Comments on this notion or questions?
I think negligence would be charged as guilty. You know, in the case that you're sitting there with your margarita, the fact that you intentionally knew that someone was going to be hurt and that you intentionally did not put the margarita down, I think negligence needs to be charged, just like, you know, like we were talking a couple lectures ago, drunk driving and the accountability there. I think if you know what's happening and you just choose to mind your own business and watch them die, you should be charged for that.
Agreed. Yep. So in that moment, I'm prioritizing the good myself, but there's an even greater good there, right? I think all of us would agree to that.
That, and like you were talking about, you know, the devil wanting us to believe that he's just as powerful, those kind of things. I think that it's very easy to duplicate certain things, but you cannot duplicate the fruits of the Spirit in people, in believers. And so you will know them by the fruit that they bear. I think that's obvious to me anyway. And in the end, I think we have to do what makes us feel right. If it's no matter what somebody tells me, you know, that's not your kid, don't touch them. That kid could sue you if they drowned anyway. You put the margarita down and that family's going to sue you because you touched that. Because you hear those stories. You're trying to save someone and then you get sued for attempting to do that. But the bottom line in any ethics question to me is your own ethics, your own moral standard. And I have my own bar, no matter what this class or what anybody else tells me, it should be the bar. I have my own bar. And I think that in the end of life, that's what we're measured by.
Well said, Mandy. I can't find any fault on what you just said. I'm going to call on you, Autumn. I haven't heard from you since the beginning of class. What do you think about this notion of evil?
I really kind of conflicted because I think there needs to be evil for there to be good, like for us to know what good is. But I was also sitting here thinking when she was talking about like negligence and stuff like that. Like, so, like when we're back talking about generosity, like what was it called? Like where one side was so little and the other was so like reckless.
Yeah, the golden mean.
Yeah, that. Like, so would it be considered negligent if you sat there or was a bystander to somebody basically getting their karma if they're evil, as in like they did bad things to children or something like that? Would that still be considered negligent or evil for you to stand by and watch that? Or that still depend upon you and your morals? Does that make any sense?
Try to say that again. Reframe that question for me.
I don't know how. I'm really getting out like that.
Yeah.
So, is it still considered evil if you don't just recklessly run out and save somebody?
Yeah, I see what
like, is it selfish to think of yourself, especially if you have family?
So you're asking, would it be recklessness in the courage or cowardice? Is it the Aristotle's concept, right? Cowardice, courage, correct.
Okay, Autumn. So if there's a person on a bridge and they're threatening to commit suicide, and you're like, if I get on that bridge, he could take me with him. I think that's completely a different scenario than the drinking the margarita and watching the child drown. Again, I think that's you know, okay, if I get on that bridge, I don't think that we're called to be negligent to ourselves and our own safety either.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do it like to someone like that, but if they were somebody who is like pure evil, like you've been around somebody who's just there's not good people. Is that still considered morally wrong? Or is it still dependent upon your person?
So instead of it being an innocent child in the pool example, right? What if it was somebody who's a piece of crap, right? Would you still jump in and save them?
I'm talking too much in this class call. I got too much to say on this one, so I need to be quiet. But it's not my job to judge you. We're not called to judge people. And so if Allison is an alcoholic or Caitlin's a drug addict or Emily is a bad mom, Autumn, whatever, it's not my job to determine that. I can't determine, that Autumn is not a good person. And so I can't save her. My job and, my moral compass is they are going to drown. What you do with your life after I save you from the water is between you and Jesus. But I would not sit there. I would find that it would be very morally wrong, to let them drown. Well, that's just a homeless person or that's just an alcoholic, whatever it is that in our own mind that you would rationalize not jumping into the water. Nah, jump in the water. I'd come get y'all, just so you know. I'd jump in.
Yeah, I think Mandy said it better than I could. Whatever the person may or may not have done, and Christian thought at least, it's God's. That's only God can judge, right? That homeless person could go on to get a degree in biochemistry and go on to cure cancer for all you know, right? So you would owe it a responsibility to help the person under the natural law to kind of bring the class back full circle. So, yep. So to conclude today, then, we only got through book 3. So next time I will go back and look at book 4 and 5, which we barely got to today. Okay. And over the next week, work on finishing up through book 9. There's more than 9 books in Confessions, but the ones after book 9 aren't really about ethics. They're about other stuff. So that's why we're stopping at book 9. Okay. So we will keep going next time. See you all then.
Y'all have a good day.
See you, Mandy.